A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, Peter Abetz is the Western Australian State Director for the Australian Christian Lobby. We'd like to get an update and a preview to the political agenda ahead for the coming week. Peter Abetz, a special welcome back to 2020.
Good morning and good to be with your listeners, Neil.
Peter, let me start with something which is really a national issue, and I know that there'll be many listeners who've caught a bit of update detail on what's happened with Dave Pello, who's been a regular guest on this program for many years. He's the founder of the Church and State Summits, and as a Christian preacher, he's being dragged before the Queensland Human Rights Commission over his views on the Indigenous Welcome to Country ceremonies. You've no doubt been following this along, and I'm wondering whether you've got an insight or two to offer here.
Look, it's actually quite bizarre, to say the least, that the Human Rights Commission or Anti-Discrimination Commission would even take on this particular case, because all it was Dave Pello explaining his views in a polite, courteous way about the so-called welcomes to country and how he believes that doesn't fit in with, it's not compatible with a Christian worldview. And the reality is that the welcome to country is really a calling on the spirits of the departed, or the ancestors of the current Aboriginal people, calling on the spirits of their ancestors to allow or to welcome people to come onto this land as though the land actually belongs to those spirit beings. And now, while that may be traditional Aboriginal religion, as a Christian, Dave Pello is absolutely entitled to hold a different view, and so it beggars belief that that's even going to the Anti-Discrimination Commission or Human Rights Commission, as they call it up there.
From what I understand, Dave used an alternative, and it was a reading, just a single verse out of the whole Bible, Psalm 24, verse 1, which, remember, it reads, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world, and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters." So there is a sense there in which there is a welcome to country, but it's in a bigger context of the creator of all things. Is this something you think that might even be something that will catch on? Because I know that a lot of churches actually do welcome to country ceremonies. What are your thoughts here?
Look, I think that from a Christian perspective, the whole world belongs to God. It does not belong to the spirits of ancestors. That's our Christian belief. And so I believe that welcome to countries are, I actually share Dave's view that they are not compatible with the Christian view of things. So for Dave to be able to read Psalm 24 and give some expression to the fact that we all are equal before God and so on, I don't have any issue with that at all. I think that's highly appropriate in a Christian setting. And I think actually, if you go online and Google Rodney Rivers, welcome to country, there's an article that Rodney Rivers, who's an Aboriginal man, wrote. He's a Christian, and about the smoking ceremonies and that. It's very worthwhile reading. He, as a Christian, Aboriginal person, has some very strong things to say about those things.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I know that Dave Pello has been using that statistic, and I think it's absolutely accurate. He says 54% of Aboriginal people are identifying as Christian, and all of a sudden these welcome to country ceremonies, in fact pushed by something like 2% of Aboriginal people, around the smoking ceremonies and the spirits and the animistic way of doing those welcomes. So there's a little bit of a sense of an imbalance of representation there, isn't there? Because given the status of the number of Christian people who were in the Indigenous community are identifying as Christian.
For sure. And I think we live in a country where we supposedly have freedom of religion. Therefore, a person who holds to the traditional Aboriginal animistic religions, they should be free to give expression to their beliefs. But by the same token, Dave Pellow and others should be free to give expression to their understanding of what they believe. And that's the idea of being a pluralistic society, that we respect the fact that different people have different opinions, that just because I disagree with someone, you don't hold them before some anti-discrimination or human rights commission. That's just crazy stuff. And the problem, though, is that people can weaponise or utilise these anti-discrimination, human rights commission processes to try and silence anybody who disagrees with them. Because if you take a person to the Human Rights Commission, or in WA to the Equal Opportunity Commission, the person who makes the complaint, they don't have to spend 50 cents. They just make the complaint. The Commission takes that on board, and then you, who are the accused, you have to spend money defending yourself. And even if you're exonerated afterwards, it can cost you $100,000 plus in legal fees, and you're all okay, but you can't get your money back. So it's a very unjust system. And during the same-sex marriage campaign, you may recall Archbishop Porteous in Hobart was hauled before their Tasmanian anti-discrimination body. And, I think it cost the Catholic Church $100,000 in legal fees before the person who made the complaint actually dropped the complaint. But, again, there was no recourse to recoup the money that you've spent. And I think that is a gross injustice.
A huge unfair imbalance. And I know that there is a fundraising campaign going on for the Human Rights Law Alliance. And I know that, and we'll be talking to Dave Pellow about this probably tomorrow on this program. But interesting, isn't it? Dave Pellow says, well, look, it's a Christian teaching meeting led by Christians. It's for Christians. It's of Christian doctrine that he was talking about. And so for someone to make a complaint around what happens in a Christian gathering, that is going to really, put a wedge there. But for some churches, this is going to be very important, because a lot of churches do their own welcome to country, and they want to be respectful of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But this is going to put a bit of a wedge there, and it's going to make people think about what's appropriate in a Christian gathering. Hey, some other big issues that are going on, particularly in your backyard in Western Australia, Peter. The Births, Deaths and Marriages Registration Amendment, Sex or Gender Changes Bill 2024. What's happening in WA?
Look, that went through the lower house back in May and was just sort of sitting there, and now it's gone up to the upper house finally, and the debate commenced last Wednesday, I think it was, and the bill, basically what it does is it abolishes the Gender Reassignment Board, which was the board that people who wanted to change their gender officially and legally needed to go to, and generally you needed to have undergone medical treatment, surgical treatment, whatever, to be able to change your gender. But they want to abolish the Gender Reassignment Board now, and all that you need is, if, say, me as a man, if I want to from now on be known as a female, all I need to do is I need to find one doctor or one psychologist to sign a prescribed form, and I can then post that into the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages, and they will post me back a new birth certificate that says that I was born female, which, to my way of thinking, is actually government-sanctioned fraud, because it's the certificate no longer is actually reflecting the facts of your birth.
Some of the ramifications there, Peter, what does it mean for, say, schools? Because this is pretty significant, boys in the girls' toilets and various things like that. What are your thoughts here?
Look, absolutely. If you have a year 11 or 12 student, a male, biological male, who now identifies as female, say 17 years old, so he would be well through into puberty, to say the least, for that biological male now to be allowed to go and play in the girls' teams, to go and use the girls' change rooms, girls' showers after sport, whatever. I don't think any parent in their right mind would consider that acceptable.
I guess this is related to developments around the CAS review and what they might be thinking about in WA in the Parliament there, because this CAS review has had ramifications around the world. Finally, a little bit of scientific insight into these issues. What's the status in Western Australia around the CAS review?
Look, at this stage, the Minister for Health still is burying her head in the sand by claiming that the CAS review has no relevance to Western Australia because we do things very differently, apparently. But the reality is that the West Australian gender clinics actually operate on the same treatment protocols as the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, and the Melbourne Hospital Clinic. The CAS review found that, and they carefully looked at their processes, they found that the evidence base for what they were doing was actually very, very minimal, and they rated, I think it was 19 out of 100, which is not a very satisfactory score, to say the least, for engaging in life-changing treatments for children who many actually end up changing their mind and regretting that they've gone down that path. And so it was actually pleasing to see that the National Health Service in the United Kingdom has actually it's just starting to implement one of the recommendations from the CAS review, which was to actually set up a clinic that caters specifically for young people who regret having transitioned, and to help them go back to their biological reality rather than having lived in this fantasy world of being the gender other than what they were born as. So that's a very helpful development, and I certainly know there are plenty of people here in Australia who transitioned, who now regret having transitioned, and I believe that they certainly deserve some help. And so I think a specialised facility or body to help them medically, etc., I think it's high time that was happening. But at this stage, unfortunately in Western Australia, the Minister is still burying her head in the sand.
And not just in WA, but as I understand it, the push for some sort of independent inquiry has been resisted at federal government level, and in every state and every territory. There are no people in Australian government right now who have any courage to actually say, let's have an independent review of this. Now, they've obviously done that in the UK, and they're now moving to support people who want to detransition. What are your thoughts about what's happening here in Australia, and the fact that no one has any courage to stand up and say this is all wrong, and let's save a whole lot of people from a lifelong heartache here? What are your thoughts?
Look, Libby Mettam, the leader of the Liberals here in Western Australia, they're not in government, obviously, they're in opposition. She announced some weeks ago now that if the Liberals were to win government, they would initiate an inquiry and basically ban the puberty blockers for children under, I think, 16. So that was very brave of Libby Mettam to take that stand, and she came in for a lot of flack from it. But the fact that I think she had the courage to come out with that gave the Minister for Health in Tasmania, Guy Barnett, the courage to actually write to the federal minister to call for a national inquiry, because he feels that a national review would be the best thing to do, and that makes a lot of sense from the perspective that all the clinics in Australia basically use the same protocols. So a national inquiry certainly would be helpful, but failing a national one, a state one would be very helpful too. And I think some of the, I think it was the New South Wales and Northern Territory, the Lay Party of the Lay Liberal Party passed motions calling for a ban on puberty blockers and an inquiry. So there is movement. I think the tide is starting to turn on this issue, but we've still got a long way to go before we before it's likely that we actually have a inquiry, because with the federal election coming up in May, the Albanese government's probably not likely to want to initiate an inquiry at this point, which could be controversial. And here in Western Australia, for example, we've got an election coming up in March and only about 20 sitting days left of Parliament. So the chance of getting an inquiry before the election is probably not high.
Interesting, isn't it, to the UK example, that following that CAS report, the British National Health Service has announced it will establish a service to assist the growing number of young people who regret having transitioned. So assisting those young people in Australia is still way off beyond the next state or federal election, if there is any change of government. So that's something, there's an awful lot of young people who are going to get caught up into a lifelong medicalisation and going through their own regrets for transitioning. That is all going to be happening ongoing until someone has enough courage to stand up and be counted and do something that will help those who want to detransition. Hey, let me ask you about religious freedom and Christian schools. Is there any update for things that are going on in WA?
Look, there's really hasn't been any change in that. I think the state government was waiting to see what the federal legislation would end up being, but as Albanese has indicated, he's not going to proceed with the religious discrimination bill because he wants bipartisan support, and the opposition has made clear what changes they want. They want the changes that the Christian school movement has put to the Attorney General, and it would appear that the Labor government is not prepared to take those changes on board, and therefore they're basically stalling, which in a sense is a positive thing because it at least allows the current exemptions to continue to be in place. But the reality is it means there is no, moving forward, no protection for religious bodies. And so in a way, Albanese is actually coming in for criticism from both the Australian Christian lobby and the Christian school movement, as well as from the LGBTQ activists, because they were wanting the bill to go through as per the Law Reform Commission report, and the bill that was drafted is actually just implements all those recommendations, and those recommendations are simply totally unacceptable to any faith-based schools, not just Christian schools, but the Muslim schools, Jewish schools find them abhorrent. And so I think the thing we've got to really watch is and ask each of the parties and each of the candidates going up to the federal election is where will they stand on this issue? Will they be a voice for freedom for Christian schools or faith-based schools to operate in keeping with their ethos, to be allowed to give preference to people in employment who are of the faith that the school represents, and to require staff to actually live according to the principles of that faith, and in that way support the education of the children. Their parents send their kids to a faith-based school, not just for academic purposes, but they want their children to be immersed in a community that actually models the Christian life or the Muslim life or the Jewish life. So this is really, really going to be important and really needs to be at the forefront of the minds of people of faith going into the next federal election.
So the promised federal religious discrimination bill has stalled. There's some positives in there because all sorts of things can go haywire when there is a whole new set of wordings. But there is still no defence or protections for Christians and religious freedom. Hey, just very quickly, you're looking at all sorts of things that are going on in WA. A little bit of an expose on the Greens and their policies that you've been talking about. What's so obvious about the Greens and their policies that you've been drawing attention to?
Yeah, look, it's not just Western Australia, but this is actually on the national scene. Just some of the policies that the Greens have been espousing in terms of faith-based schools, that's very concerning. They want to basically phase that out. like funding for non-government schools. They want to abolish the Australian Border Force, which, you think, hang on a minute, do you really want to abolish the Australian Border Force? Do you want refugee boats to come in willy-nilly on our shores? There's the quarantine issues that brings, plus, that's a signal to the people smugglers to start business again. It's just quite remarkable what they're advocating. And the interesting thing is most people think of the Greens as the party for environment, sustainability, and so on, but they really have become what I would consider very much a fairly extreme Marxist, philosophically based party that has a very thin veneer of environmental issues on the surface, but when you go down a little bit deeper, it becomes rather red, and as I refer to them sometimes as the watermelon party, green on the outside but very red on the inside.
And an apt illustration of just the way the whole thing looks. Peter Abetz is the Western Australian State Director for the Australian Christian Lobby. To connect with Peter or to be able to find some resource on some of the things we've been talking about, you might want to visit the ACL website, acl.org.au, the Australian Christian Lobby website, acl.org.au. Peter Abetz, thanks so much for your update today on 2020.
Good to be with you, Neil, and your listeners.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.